Modal improvisation. This chapter is going to deal with a lot of songs and chord progressions that feature modal cadences. And basically, a modal cadence is one that really features the sound of a mode. It doesn't typically have 2-5-1s like we would hear. If you think about 2-5-1 cadences, those are usually featured in songs that have a major scale as its tonal center, because the 2 and 5 and 1 are such important chords within the context of a major scale. But with modal music, what we're doing is really featuring one of the modes of the major, such as Dorian or Phrygian, or even a mode of another scale, such as a mode of melodic minor, a mode of harmonic minor. And modal jazz really, it really took off with Miles Davis's 1959 record, Kind of Blue, where in stark contrast to the jazz music of the time, which featured a lot of, lots of chromatic harmony, lots of 2-5s, 2-5 substitutions, tritone subs, just really packing it in, almost in a Baroque style in post-bop. Bill Evans and Miles Davis and others at the time were looking for new ways to express themselves through compositions in jazz. And one of the ideas put forth was this idea of playing on a mode, not unlike in Eastern music, where the sound of a particular mode or chord scale was really the dominant flavor of a song. That's illustrated so obviously on the opening song of Kind of Blue. This is Miles Davis's So What? And it's illustrated briefly in example 1. And what we have here is basically a cadence that doesn't feature 2-5-1, but rather two chords that are featured prominently in the mode, which in this case is D Dorian. So if we just look at the two chords that are featured in this song, they're both almost stacked entirely in fourths. We have this moving to D minor. So we could analyze these two chords and say, well, this is E minor 11, and this is a D minor 11. And D minor is actually the tonal center. They both belong to the key of C major, but the cadences really never emphasize C major, in contrast to example 2, where we have a very traditional cadence, 2, 5, 1. And a lot of that movement and tension and resolution is really dictated by the tritone in the G7, the 5-7 chord, which traditionally needs to be resolved too. But in modal music, particularly in example 1 and So What, it doesn't necessarily need to resolve. There isn't this journey of tension and resolution and then tension and resolution. It just kind of is. It lives in this world of Dorian. So we're outlining the tonic, which is D minor 11, and the cadence in this case is another chord that belongs to D Dorian, which is E minor 11. So here's example 1 in time. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's take a look at each of the individual modes of major. These are listed in order in the chart in your guide. But I think something that's really helpful to really get into the sound of a particular mode is to play each mode over the same root or the same tonic. So, in other words, instead of exploring the modes of C major as all part of the major scale, for example, C major and then D Dorian and E Phrygian and so on, those will all kind of sound like C major, but I think it would be more helpful to take maybe a static root and play all of the different modes with the same root. This is sometimes called parallel thinking. In the next several examples, we're going to do this with the root of A. And this is a nice key to use on guitar because, of course, you have an open A string, so you can play little melodic lines, the entire mode, and little chords stacked on these intervals of the mode to hear it in context and hear how they change. So A, in this case, is the constant, but you can hear how different the sounds and the colors and the flavors of each mode are when each are played over A. So let's get started with A major. The modal name for this is Ionian. That's the Greek name for it. And in example 3, we just have a little melody followed by a chord that could be used in the context of A major. So here's example 3. And with all of these examples, just kind of let the open A string ring so you can hear the context of the melody and the scale over that. Now in example 4, we're going to play the exact same rhythmic fragment or the same motivic idea, but this time using the notes of A Phrygian, and listen to how different the sound is. Here we go. Example 4. Now in example 5, we'll play the same motivic idea, the same lick, but now using the notes of A Lydian, which is very close to A major, just with a sharp 4 or a raised fourth. Here's example 5. So you can hear all three are vastly different in sound and color, and this type of approach will really help you express yourself in your own compositions as well as your playing in modal and traditional tonal music. So let's move forward and explore each of the modes of major one at a time. Example 6, we'll return back to A major, A Ionian, and we'll start off by playing a scale, just a simple scale over the open A string, and then just a melodic idea. So here we go. Here's example 6, A major. Now in example 7, we're going to explore A Dorian. Here's the scale followed by some chordal and melodic ideas. Example 7. Now in example 8, we'll take a quick look at A Phrygian. This is the third mode of major, and it has a very different sound from both major and Dorian. Here's the scale, followed by a melodic idea. Example 8. All right, continuing our exploration of each mode as they relate to this tonal center of A using the open A string so we can hear it in context. We'll continue with Lydian, but I just wanted to also mention that a complete chart of modal colors is included in the chapter or in your guide. And what the chart does is it illustrates the intervallic formula of each mode and also the color notes of each, the inherent color notes of each mode. Basically, the color notes are notes that make that mode unique within the context of its relative chord. So, for example, Lydian, its relative chord is a major 7th chord, but what makes Lydian unique is the sharp 4 or sharp 11. That makes it unique from major, which also features a relative major 7th chord or home chord. So each of these modes have a unique color note, and those are all illustrated in detail in the modal colors chart. So make sure to check that out as you're working through these modes. Let's continue with example 9. This features A Lydian. So we'll play the scale over an open A string, and then we'll play a melodic excerpt. Here we go, example 9. Moving ahead to the 5th mode of major, we now have Mixolydian, and this is the mode that's usually paired with dominant 7th chords, unaltered dominant 7ths. So here's example 10, the Mixolydian mode followed by a melody. The next mode in major scale is Aeolian. This is also known as the natural minor scale, but it is the 6th mode of major, and of course you've probably realized that the major scale starting on a different place, starting specifically on the 6th, is actually a minor scale, and you would see that relationship between major and relative minor. So in example 11 we have A Aeolian or A natural minor, the scale, and then a little melody. Here we go, example 11. When you look at the modal colors chart in the notation or in the chapter, you'll notice that there are three minor scales in the overall major scale, or three minor modes: Aeolian, Phrygian, and Dorian. And pay attention to the chart; that will really tell you the color notes of each. You know, they all feature minor triads and minor seventh chords, but they're all different. The Phrygian has a flat 2, for example. The Aeolian has a flat 6, and the Dorian features a natural 6. So they're all very different. It's almost like if you had the color blue but had three very different shades of blue. That's how I kind of think about it with modes. You know, Phrygian would be a very dark blue color, and then Aeolian might be kind of a medium dark blue, and then Dorian is still blue, but it's a much lighter shade of blue. So think about that. I often think of these modes as colors in a palette that you can use to write songs with, play over tunes, improvise, lots of different applications. Let's finish this modal section off with example 12, which is Locrian. That's the 7th mode of major, and we'll be playing the Alocrian mode plus a little melody here. Here we go, example 12. When you're working on modal music, whether it's writing your own tune or maybe just reharmonizing a song that you already know in a modal way, it's important to take a look at modal cadences. A modal cadence is basically a succession of chords that really focus on the most important chords in a particular mode. And those important chords all feature the color note. So this is all, again, outlined in the chart that's included in the chapter. But each mode has its own color note, and then if you stack that color note in thirds in various arrangements, for example, the third or as the fifth in the chord or as the root, you have a few different triads that will really outline the sound of this particular mode in a unique way. So let's look at the next few examples. We're going to be exploring the modal cadences of major. So example 13 starts off with A Lydian, and the triads that you would feature, if we're considering A as our tonal center, you would have a certain collection of triads that really outline the sound of A Lydian. If you were thinking A major, it just wouldn't be right. It's a completely different sound. So let's look at these chords. We have basically the triads of A major, B major, and G sharp minor. And those, the B and the G sharp minor chords are very important because they all feature the D sharp, which is the color note of A Lydian. So that's just a quick explanation of the concept with these modal cadences. They originate with each unique color mode. So example 13, here are some triads that really outline the sound of A Lydian creating a modal cadence. Now listen to how different that sounds from example 14, which features triads of A major. Here we go. And of course, the very minute difference, but it's huge in sound, is the difference between D sharp in A Lydian and D natural in A major. So let's continue working through each of these modes. Example 15 features a modal cadence for A Dorian, and these are the exact same chords that we saw and heard earlier in example 1. That's the harmonic basis for So What by Miles Davis. So here's example 15, A Dorian chords. Example 16, A Phrygian. Example 17, A Lydian. Example 18, A Mixolydian. Here's example 19, A Aeolian, or A natural minor again. And finally, here are the modal cadence triads that set up the sound of A Locrian, example 20. Example 21 is a short etude called Modality, and basically it's a chord progression that's centered around C, but it highlights and showcases all of the different modes with C as the root, all of the modes of C major. So C Dorian, C major of course, C Lydian, C Phrygian, C Mixolydian, Locrian, and Aeolian. And so not only can you see what chords to use, those are highlighted in the chord symbols of the chord progression, but also how the lines change to really create a different color or new sound using each mode over this tonal setter of C. The next two examples are short etudes that feature modal cadences. Example 22 is based on the jazz standard Impressions by John Coltrane, and this is a favorite among jazz guitarists. It's been recorded by Wes Montgomery, Pat Martino, many others, and it's very similar to the harmonic structure of So What in that it's just two chords, D minor 7 and E flat minor 7 for the bridge. So the two modes that we tend to highlight would be D Dorian and E flat Dorian. But as mentioned in the text, you don't have to stick only with Dorian. In fact, it can be really effective if you use chromatic passing tones, as well as just kind of hint at other modes such as harmonic minor, Aeolian. Any of the other minor modes will sound really nice in the context of this very dominant, or overall Dorian flavor. And those are all included in the etude. Example 23 is a short etude based on the changes for On Green Dolphin Street, another very well-known standard that guitar players love to play. And this one is pretty much a tonal song. It's not really a modal song per se, but the A section does feature a series of modal cadences. There's kind of a pedal tone of C, and so to start off with, the first two bars really highlight C major, followed by C Dorian, and then we have a couple of interesting slash chords, D over C, D flat over C, cadencing to C major 7 with a sharp 11 featuring Lydian. So when you play this, just be aware of the modes with each particular measure. For example, D over C would be C Lydian, D flat over C, highlight C Phrygian, and then we resolve to C major in the last two bars of this etude. Our next two examples are short etudes based on just beautiful modal compositions in the lexicon of jazz. The first one, example 24, Inner Dialogues, is based on the changes to Joe Henderson's Inner Urge. And this is a great song that really features a lot of Lydian as well as a couple of other modes. So be sure to check out what's happening with how each mode sort of threads its way through the different chords. This one doesn't necessarily have a tonal center. It's really chord by chord by chord with a lot of chromatic motion with the major 7 sharp 11 chords. Example 25, Autumn, is an etude based on Wayne Shorter's composition Fall. This is featured on a Miles Davis record. Another beautiful song that is very modally influenced rather than having a particular tonal center. There's lots of different inherent modal cadences. This one also features the use of the dominant diminished scale, otherwise known as the half-whole scale, which is really an effective scale to create some color and different inherent triads as part of that scale. So make sure to check that out and have fun with it.